I recently made a dandy cocktail, and it was indeed dandy. Well, today we're making a fine and dandy, so you'll have to stick around to see if it lives up to its name.
If you're a theater fan who loves a great cocktail, click that subscribe button because Broadway Barfly is the channel for you.
Hello folks, Rob Driemeyer here. Welcome to Broadway Barfly. I've been on sort of this Dubonnet kick lately, and in the recent videos I made a cocktail called the Kiss and another called the Dandy. And while I was reading up on the dandy cocktail, I stumbled across something called the fine and dandy. So here we are. Now both the dandy and fine and dandy come to us from the 1930 Savoy Cocktail Book, but that's where the similarities end. I would say the fine and dandy is much more like a lemon drop martini, though it's made with gin instead of vodka. Now it's a pretty tart drink, so if that's your thing, this is going to be right up your alley. I think you could sweeten it up a little bit with some simple syrup, but then you probably wouldn't have a fine and dandy any longer. You'd have something more akin to a Chelsea sidecar, which is a sidecar made with gin instead of brandy or cognac. I wanted to share this with you because it comes from the 1930 Savoy Cocktail Book, and in 1930 on Broadway there was a musical that opened titled Fine and Dandy. Now I have no reason to think this is anything more than a coincidence, but this wouldn't be Broadway Barfly if I didn't share it with you. Fine and Dandy is long forgotten today, but it is notable for a couple of reasons. One is its title song, Fine and Dandy. It became a jazz standard, and over the years it's been recorded by everybody from Bing Crosby to Barbra Streisand. Even if you think you've never heard the song before, you probably have, because over time its melody has been used over and over again as the background music for magic acts. It was a fairly successful show. It ran for 250 performances. Now by today's standards that would not be a hit, but this was 1930. The year after the stock market crashed and plunged the country into the Great Depression. So in 1930, a show that ran for 250 performances was considered a pretty big hit. Fine and Dandy succeeded mostly because of its star, a man named Joe Cook. Now, he's not very well remembered today, but he was a big star at the time. He was a very famous comic on the vaudeville circuit. He made the transfer from vaudeville to radio, and we might be more familiar with him today if he had continued on to make films or appear on television. But in the early 1940s, he was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease, which effectively brought his career to an end. Probably the most significant thing about Fine and Dandy is that its score was written by a woman named Kay Swift. And Kay Swift was one of the first women to ever write a complete score for a Broadway musical. Now, contrary to what some people say, she wasn't the first woman to do that, but she most certainly was the first woman to write a complete score for a Broadway musical that had any degree of success. Swift wrote the score with her husband, Paul James, whose real name was James Paul Warburg. He was from the famous Warburg banking family, and so perhaps he used a pen name to obscure his true identity from the public. Swift was a classically trained musician, but it was George Gershwin who inspired her to write popular music. Now, I should point out that Swift and Gershwin had an ongoing affair, which eventually led to Swift's divorce from Warburg in 1934. Now, Swift and Gershwin never married, ostensibly because she was not Jewish, but George Gershwin passed away only a few years later in 1937 at the young age of 38. In addition to Fine and Dandy, Kay Swift wrote individual songs for other musical reviews. She composed a ballet for George Balanchine. She wrote songs for the Rockettes. But Fine and Dandy, both the show and the musical, remain her most remembered works. So to celebrate Kay Swift, I'm going to show you how to make a Fine and Dandy. And there we have a fine and dandy cocktail. Until the next time, cheers.
If you enjoyed the video, why not give it a thumbs up and share it with your friends? Feel free to leave your comments and click that subscribe button because there's a lot more Broadway Barfly to come.